Hello friends, welcome to the special segment, and as sign language expert we have Manisha Sharma with us. Today's topic of discussion is Independence Day. As all of us are aware that 15th August is celebrated as the Independence Day of India, and it's been years since 1947 that so many people, those who laid their lives for the independence of India, and how over the years during the national movement they became martyrs so that the independence could be achieved. In celebration of the kind of martyrship which was there, in celebration of the kind of efforts which have been made by India after independence of India, we are celebrating this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and since last year March 12th, and we also have seen that recently there is a campaign called Har Ghar Tiranga, in which so many people from different sections and sectors they are participating in this campaign. So Independence Day has a lot of significance from this point of view, that how we were able to free or liberate ourselves from the colonial rule. The 200 years of colonial rule of the Britishers made this kind of a situation for India, that India had to fight for a lot of things after independence because of the economic kind of a situation which was encountered, the way the colonial rulers tried to impose their own culture on India. That was another important aspect. So we find that in this particular context, the national movement, the way the different leaders they contributed to the national movement, how the peasants and the working class they came together to fight the colonial rule. Not only them, but we find the contribution of women and the women leaders, that how they participated in the various movements which were launched by Gandhi in the framework of the non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement and the Quit India movement. So the participation of women largely in the civil disobedience movement. Apart from that, we also find the participation of the students, the phase of the revolutionaries in that particular framework, where so many of them they martyred their lives, they fought the British against the kind of practices which were perpetrated on the Indians. So from that point of view, if we want to see some of the readings that which can be helpful in terms of our understanding of the national movement, Bipin Chandra's India's Struggle for Independence, Ajit Bhattacharya Trust with Destiny, and some source material from Wikipedia, and also some of the photographs they have been taken from Google. So when we talk about the independence, that how on 15th August 1947, first time the Indian flag was raised by the first Prime Minister Nehru, and the kind of pledge which was taken by so many people in that sense, that how before the Independence Day which was being celebrated on 15th August 1947, we also celebrated another Independence Day in 1930, which was 26 January 1930. Because the Congress session in 1929, it in a way decided that if they will not be able to get the Purna Swaraj, then they have to celebrate that day. And that is how the significance of 26 January is there as Republic Day in India. So when we talk about the contribution of the national movement, the contribution of the Indian leaders, that how they contributed in that sense, and how Nehru made this Independence Day speech where he said that long years ago we made a trust with destiny, and now that time comes when we shall redeem our pledge. At stroke of today's midnight hour, when world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. So this was the kind of significance of this speech, that when everyone was sleeping, then India has been awakened to life and freedom, because India had become free. So in that sense, when we try to see the contribution of the national symbols like the national flag, for example, and how it was initially designed by Pingali Venkaiah in 1921, and we also find that the current flag with the white, green and the saffron stripes which are there, along with the 24-spoke Ashok Chakra, it was hoisted, and thereafter it also became the national flag of India. Sometimes it has also been asked why this 15th August was chosen as the day of Indian independence. So it has also been argued that Mountbatten, who was the Governor General of India at that point of time, as well as Viceroy, and he was instrumental in choosing 15th August as the day when India will become independent, and he felt that it will mark the second anniversary of Japan's surrender in the World War II. So this day was chosen by Mountbatten because Mountbatten, when was asked this kind of a question by a journalist, then he did not have any fixed kind of a date in his mind, and he felt that August or September, any of the days in these months can be one of the days for the independence of India, and keeping in mind the Japan's surrender in the World War II, he gave this date as the Independence Day for India. And when we try to quote it from the Freedom at Midnight, which was written by Dominic Lepere, Mountbatten claimed in this piece that how the date I chose came out of blue. I chose it in reply to a question. I was determined to show that I was master of whole event. When they asked if we had set a date, I knew it had to be soon. I hadn't worked it out exactly then. I thought it had to be August or September, and then I went out to August 15. Why? Because it was second anniversary of Japan's surrender. So this is the kind of quote which we find in this particular book, and it has been attributed to Mountbatten, that how he arrived at that particular kind of a date. We also find that the kind of a ceremony which was being organized for the handing over of this independence, it was at the Darbar Hall of the Viceroy's house, and Gandhi believed that this Viceroy's house should be converted into a public hospital, but the authorities in power they did not think on the similar lines, and finally this particular building was referred to as the Rashtrapati Bhavan of today. And we find that Gandhi had this kind of a thing in his mind that the future presidents of India, they should live frugally like the most of the citizens of India. But the government of India felt that the imperial style which was being followed by the British rulers can be continued, and this was titled as the Rashtrapati Bhavan, and the future presidents of India they were being given this kind of a residence. When we talk about the kind of attitude which the British and the Indians they had with regard to the 15th of August, we find that in London, Whitehall, traditional custodian of empire, it saw it as a day to initiate a carefully calibrated transfer of power which was designed to preserve their essential interests in Asia. And on the other hand, when we see that how the people, those who belong to India, the leaders of the Congress, they saw it in that framework that they wanted to remind the future generations of the kind of suffering and the sacrifice which was endured by the people of India to achieve independence. We also see not only the non-violent movement led by Gandhi in the framework of the twin mantras of Satya and Ahimsa, various satyagrahas which were launched, the contribution of the revolutionaries in raising the consciousness of the masses at that point of time, revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh, etc., how they in a way tried to propagate their ideals to the public, and they wanted that the deaf ear should listen to kind of the ideas which they had and to offer with regard to the independence of India. Apart from that, we also see that leaders like Subhash Chandra Bose and his contribution in the sense of the Azad Hind Fauj, and it was also very exemplary. And at one point of time, it was also being argued that if Subhash Chandra Bose would have continued in that fashion, then British would have been driven out of India. So we have to acknowledge the different kinds of strands which were there in the national movement, and we also have seen that how the naval ratings which mutinied at this point of time, and thereafter we also see that the kind of ceremony in which the Union Jack was lowered all over India with some kind of a ceremony to mark the transfer of power. And in this particular context, we also have to see that the national movement had some kind of common aims in the kind of a diverse political and the ideological currents which were existing at that point of time. And national movement realized that during these all kinds of debates which were going on, and the various strands of the movements which were also being carried out at that point of time, the various kinds of diversity and the tensions which existed between the different sections of the society. But they realized that this diversity and this tension, it had to be taken advantage of, and this diversity at the same time should become some sort of the symbol of unity as well. And some kind of a freedom and the kind of a debate should be there, and how they should become some sort of a source of strength as well. So all this was also being thought about, and the freedom struggle, when it was being led by the various leaders at different point of time, whether the moderate phase or the extremist phase or the Gandhian phase, and the other strands of the peasant movements and the labor movement, the revolutionaries, all of them, and the contribution of Subhash Chandra Bose and the RAN ratings as well. So we find that all these kinds of things, the movement was to be some sort of a broad-based movement, and the various issues concerning the socio-economic and the political vision of the leadership, all of that had to be taken into account. And the leaders, they felt that their ideals should be democracy, civil, libertarian, and the secular character of India was to be maintained, and some sort of an egalitarian social order, as well as an independent foreign policy. They should be some sort of fundamental blocks of an independent India. And they also felt that when they will in a way pursue all these kinds of ideals, then only they will be able to realize them. And these kinds of democratic ideas which will be there, they will be able to establish the credentials of the national movement, as well as they will carry forward the kind of progress and the development which was in a way being demanded at that point of time, and which was to be pursued in the later years as well. So we find that how the nationalists, they wanted that some kind of a representative government should be there on the basis of the popular elections, and these elections, they should be based on the issue of the adult franchise, that everyone who is an adult shall have the right to vote. So all these kinds of ideas, they persisted at that point of time, and they felt that all sorts of freedom should be given to the individuals as well as to the press as well. And they should have this kind of a freedom of expression. They should have the freedom to make any kind of an association and to continue the struggle for the national movement. So in that sense, when we see that how the national movement was also was asking for some kind of a struggle for the economic development of India, and over a period of time some kind of an economic ideology was also developed which dominated the views during the times of struggle, and thereafter when India became independent. So we find that how the national movement in a way accepted with some kind of a unanimity that there was a need to develop India on the basis of industrialization, and which was in turn was to be independent of the foreign capital. So there was to be the use of the indigenous capital. There should not be any kind of reliance on the foreign capital, And when it will be dependent on the indigenous capital, then one will be able to maintain the independent foreign policy as well. So we find that how the public sector as well as the private sector, they came together at that point of time, and some sort of a mixed economy was followed after independence. So the public sector had to cater to all those kinds of industries where the private sector may not venture, and which needed a lot of investment. And at the same time, the private sector had also to support the public sector, in that sense that they should get all sorts of support from the government, and India should go to some kind of a path of development. We also find that the people, those who were associated with the national movement, they also had this kind of a pro-poor orientation, and they were also committed to the ideals of secularism as well. And we also find that India at that point of time had witnessed that how it was being crushed under the weight of imperialist and the colonial policies. So India was supportive of all such kind of movements which was launched across the world, which were fighting against the colonial forces or the imperialist forces. So we find that how Indians, they established this kind of a principles that Indians should not hate the British people, but they should hate the British imperialism. So this kind of an idea was made known to the people, and how with the other parts of the world they wanted to maintain that kind of a relation where all sorts of support to the any kind of anti-colonial, anti-capitalist and kind of a movement could be given, and all sorts of movements which were more progressive in nature, they could be supported. We also find that that is how the ideals and the aspirations of the people, those who were associated with the national movement, they were being realized later, and how the national movement was a popular multi-class movement at that point of time. We also see that at that point of time, when we try to understand the national movement, how the independence was achieved and how it was a mass movement as well, and the various energies, talents and the capacities of the people, they had to be realized, and the contribution of the people in that sense that how they participated in the various strands of the movement, whether satyagraha, all sorts of demonstrations which were being carried out, all sorts of constructive work, all sorts of nationalist dramas and the poetry festivals which were being organized, then the nationalist novels, poems, etc. which were being written, and the various kinds of Prabhat fairies which were being launched at that point of time. But we also realize that how when India became independent, there was some kind of a shift in the Congress leadership, as Gandhi believed that the Congress party should not remain as a political party because it was in a way heading the national movement at that point of time, but party continued, and this kind of a shift in the Congress leadership from the proud fighters for the independence of India in 1942 to pawns of British diplomacy in 1947, as has been argued by Ajit Bhattacharya ji. And Nehru also explained this to an English author, Leonard Mosley, in 1960, that when he talks that truth is that we were tired men and we were getting on in years too. Few of us could stand prospect of going to prison again, and if we had stood for a united India as we wished it, prison obviously awaited us. So these kinds of things, they were there in the minds of people, that what will happen, and this kind of a thing was also in the mind of Nehru as well. And when he says that we saw fires burning in Punjab and heard of killings, planned for partition, offered a way out, and we took it. We expected that partition would be temporary, that Pakistan was bound to come back to us. But we find that these kinds of ideas, Nehru was wrong in that sense on both the counts, because the killings, they increased as partition neared, and Pakistan also remained a separate nation, though India was able to promote split between the East and West Pakistan in 1971, as has been argued by Ajit Bhattacharya ji. We also find that when India became independent, then partition riots, they were also being there, and how Gandhi played an important role during the time when he was there in Calcutta and Noakhali. And Gandhi, when Gandhi was asked to come to Delhi, because the situation was also not very favorable in Delhi, and Gandhi was very instrumental in terms of resolving the issue of riots when he was there in Noakhali, where Gandhi was walking alone, and he was persuading the Muslim leaders that not to attack the Hindu minority. And we find that when Gandhi was in Calcutta, when the communal tempers, they were rising at that point of time, and Gandhi in a way persuaded Muslim leader Shahid Sohrawardi to join him in moving into a dilapidated slum building in an area with a mixed population of Hindus and Muslims. And Gandhi's presence had a magical effect, that how he was able to bring some kind of a peace in that particular time, and Mountbatten saw him in a way a one-man boundary force. When the British army was not able to take care of that kind of a situation, then Gandhi was the one who was able to in a way control that kind of a situation at that point of time. And we also find that how so many people during the times of partition, they got displaced, and so many casualties could be seen, and there was a lot of religious violence as well. And when on 15th August 1947 Nehru raised the Indian national flag above the Lahori gate of Red Fort in Delhi, when India became independent. So all the kind of euphoria which was there at that point of time in the context of achieving the independence was in the minds of people, and people, they were filled with a lot of hope that once they will be able to secure the independence, then all the problems with which India was afflicted, all of them, they will go away. And the contribution of the various leadership and the masses and the different strands of the movement in terms of achieving the independence, so that after 75 years now, that we are able to celebrate it in a very grand kind of a style, and people are in a way cherishing the kind of contribution which has been made by different sections of the society, not only in terms of achieving the independence, but at the same time continuing that kind of a legacy, so that the India should be there at the path of development. So we will continue further in our next lecture on independence. Till that time, thank you very much.